as Margie mentioned, I did a lot of my work down south in big, muddy rivers, large river ecosystems. And the Grand River is pretty cool because here's a large river ecosystem that's very similar to a lot of the southern rivers, and its headwaters are trout streams, which are very similar to our northern Michigan rivers. And it connects to Lake Michigan, which is a big, cold, nutrient-poor body of water. So here we have this mosaic of habitats. And probably when you think of the Grand River, you think of something like this. A muddy river with two banks, a channel of flowing water. That's what you see when you see the Grand River. But really, from a fish's perspective, the Grand is this whole mosaic of habitats. It's not just the river itself. It's the floodplain, it's the creeks that come in, it's lakes like Spring Lake and the bayous, and even Lake Michigan itself. So here's an entrance to one of the bayous, and you can see that sometimes it's quite obvious that these bayous feed right into the Grand River and connect very directly all year long. But other backwaters are not normally connected. It takes a really big flood to come up into these backwaters and really mix the two waters. But fish really key in on that. Some fish especially really key in on moving between those habitats when there is a flood event. So just because you see something like this in the middle of the summer doesn't mean that it's always like that. So again, as I mentioned, we have Lake Michigan, which has its own unique group of fish that can only tolerate cold water. We have Spring Lake and the bayous, which are really nutrient-rich standing areas of water. So they're really like eutrophic lakes. And then we have the Grand River itself and many, many tributaries, ranging from those little trout streams to medium-sized warm water rivers. So we have this huge gradient, this huge diversity, and as a result, we have really diverse fish. We have at least 107 species in the Grand system, 98 of which have been recorded in Ottawa County. So it's a pretty amazing number of fish. And we don't have hard, fast numbers here, but there's probably more than that because there's so much movement between habitats. And you have to be out there sampling at the right time in the right place. And some of the fish from Lake Michigan, for example, only come in during the winter months. And some of them may only occasionally visit. Whereas others reside in the river for most of their life, and then might move up to tributaries to spawn, or might move into the backwaters to spawn and eat. So if you look at an area upstream, like the gravel pits and Riverside Park, you can see this variety of habitats from the artificial lakes, the gravel pits that are connected in or more isolated. You can even see from satellite imagery the difference in the water color, which is a difference in the water clarity that's related to how connected it is to the river. And when I was doing my paddlefish research, I would choose areas based on those differences, because different colors of water mean different plankton types and better habitat for different stages of life for whichever fish is interested in. If you look at this bayou, it's kind of a darker color because it doesn't mix much with the river. And as a result, it's going to be more suitable for a lot of the warm water fish. But bottom line here is we're really talking about different habitat connectivity. And when you think habitat connection, a lot of times with rivers, we think about the longitudinal, the up and down connection. And if you know much about rivers, you know that dams fragment that connectivity. So when you have a dam on a river, fish no longer can pass up and down. We think about this a lot with things like salmon and the need to do something to allow them to pass over these dams. But it goes a lot deeper than that. It's not just about the salmon, and it's not just about that longitudinal connectivity. It's also about the latitudinal, the connectivity between those floodplain areas. And in a lot of the areas, especially the big rivers down south, if you picture that Locksville next to the river, they often have a levee separating the rest of the floodplain from the big river. And the bigger the river is, the more likely it is to have levees that basically force that river into its channel, even when it floods, to protect ag land and houses and other developments in the floodplain, so people build in the floodplain. Here, we don't have as much of that. We do towards Grand Haven a bit, but as you go upstream, there's a remarkable amount of land that is still there, undeveloped, and still very connected into the river, especially when it floods. So the Grand River Greenway project is really heartening in this sense, because here the parks system is is buying up that land along the river and maintaining it in a somewhat natural state. So if you look at this outlet of I think this is Bruce Bayou, you can see that this is connected and it stays connected all the time. So there's always a connection. But again, these other oxbows oftentimes only connect occasionally. For example, this one has a little culvert and there's a very shallow creek that pretty much dries up during the summer. But when it floods, I was here 2 years ago, and this whole oxbow was actually a side channel of the river, and the only dry area was over here. There was a current flowing through here and flowing over the parking lot, and fish were swimming over the parking lot in inches of water to get into that oxbow. And not just a couple, hundreds of fish, because that's a natural part of their life cycle. They key into that flood pulse in the spring, and that drives their early life history. They're looking for areas like this that have good plankton, that have rooted plants, and that provide everything that their young need, whereas the adult fish often do better in the main channel. So that, again, that's the Oxbow Lake. It's actually an old channel of the river. So these lakes and bayous that we have, a lot of them, especially the ones that look like a channel next to the river, those are old river channels. As the rivers age, they migrate, they move back and forth, and they leave these oxbows in various states of connectivity. Well, that's good. So again, when we think of connectivity, we often think of longitudinal connectivity. We think of fragmentation in the form of dams. This is 6th Street Dam in Grand Rapids. It's the first dam upstream. It's about 42 miles by river. And the next dam is quite a ways upstream of that in Lyons. So, you know, relative to a lot of rivers, we don't have a very fragmented river in the Grand. Very few large rivers don't have one dam after another. And you'll notice that this is a low-head dam. In fact, I've been there when you can not really see the dam at all because it's completely underwater when you get a big enough flood. So a lot of fish, well, a few fish, can jump this even without the aid of a fish ladder. But there is also a fish ladder here. And the fish ladder is basically a series of steps. How many people have been to the fish ladder in Grand Rapids? Okay, about half. Well, it's a really neat place to go because if you get it right, you can see a lot of fish trying to ascend this. And something I'll point out is as you go up, the steps get a little higher, and the highest step there is a lamprey barrier. It's built specifically to keep the invasive fish out. So in doing so, it lets some of the game fish jump, but it doesn't let everything pass up the ladder. And that's intentional because lamprey are very destructive of our fishery. Again, that's part of the negative side. They're an invasive species, but we have a lot of fish that try to use this ladder other than salmon too. I was there a couple weeks ago, and if you watch, there were a lot of fish jumping. And I had lots of people come up to me because I was filming this and say, well, what are these? What are these? What kind of salmon are these? And I said, they're not salmon at all. They're silvery. You see the gold, the silver. You see them jumping up this incredibly turbulent water. But if you take a closer look,
wow.
They're suckers, yeah.
Yeah, I've done that.
And there's lots of different species in here. These are all native fish, too. These aren't the exotics. You know, we think of a lot of the bottom-feeding fish. For some reason, there's a stigma to them. But these particular fish live in fast water for most of their life. Some of them actually require really fast, deep water with hard bottom. There goes a bass. But as you'll see, they're jumping right up these lower steps with ease. They'll sit right in this fast water. They'll come right through this really turbulent, rapids-like area just fine, but they can't jump past that lamprey barrier. It's 18 inches high. It's just a little too much. They're not really built to ascend that kind of a drop. But they are pretty adept at finding those areas that they can scoot up over the lower steps. And you see there were just one packed on top of another, literally top to bottom, solid fish. I would hit something with my camera and think it was bottom and pull back, but it was always just fish. There were so many in there. And 2 days later, nothing. It's very well timed. These fish are, again, very keyed in to the ups and downs of the river. And they felt it rise at just the right time of year when the temperature was just starting to rise, and they all keyed in on it. And it wasn't just one species.